I guess I'll be the first one to comment on this. Initially, given the fact that there was so little known about COVID at the very beginning, I understand the initial rationale of wanting to sort of head into like a precautionary lockdown to limit people's contact and limit the spread. That being said, though, once more was known about COVID and its real transmissibility, its real severity, the sort of lack of general life-threatening symptoms in children, they're almost like what happened after 9/11. There became this sort of pandemic security theater that just pervaded everything. It's completely unnecessary. The virus can't get you if you were in a restaurant and you're sitting down, unmasked. But if you stand up, you're over the virus's vertical limit, and you're gonna get it. So like stuff like that, like performative masking, it went on way too long.
Specifically with COVID, I feel like it did a lot of like things economically for us that kind of was a little bit of a setback. I know like a lot of people lost their jobs and people did go homeless. I know like myself during the pandemic too, I was actually a senior in high school. I had my own like stuff going on, but I was also homeless during the pandemic as well, which was actually really hard to like deal with because also like I couldn't get a job and like do my own thing as well. But yeah.
So, I arrived in USA 2 days ago, and in my country, lockdown is just released. There is no lockdowns anymore. I'm from Republic of Georgia.
Yes.
And I'm not familiar all the stuff in Portland, and I'm just staying here for the next 2 weeks.
Yeah.
After that, I go to Texas for my master's degree. So, as I know, there is no lockdown in Texas. And even in Portland, I haven't felt that there is some lockdown restrictions.
How do you feel about the lockdown?
I feel safe, really. It was useful, the lockdowns, when the COVID was pretty awful at times, a few years ago, in 2020, it was so dramatic, but now I feel safe, really.
Okay.
Even a couple of weeks ago I was in contact, but I didn't get COVID, because it's so soft nowadays, the COVID, to be infected, as I know.
I broadly agree with what my friend said there. I think I used to be like super like pro lockdown when it started. In retrospect, I think it was harmful in a lot of ways. I've got a friend who's a teacher who is teaching a whole generation of kids, which just really screwed up our
The learning loss.
Remote learning was a complete disaster. Likewise, I think the masking was good. I've tended to be pro-masking. I feel like that's less of an imposition on people than for them to constantly stay in their homes or mandatory vaccinations and things like that. But looking back at the beginning of the pandemic, it is a little weird how like extremely stringent we were. Like April of 2020, everything's locked down, can't go anywhere, and like the cases, if you look at the graph of the cases for the last few years, the cases were like way down here, and then like last winter, cases were way up here. There were no mask mandates left, no lockdowns remaining, and things were actually relatively fine and normal. So it just seems very odd in retrospect, and I don't think that it was handled very well by the government.
What did you see as far as
An increase in homelessness.
Yep, a big time.
She loves to go
Yeah.
give them, she gets cases of water and cases of granola bars and just goes around town and just hands them out to people who look like they need them.
Yeah.
Okay, so the lockdown, in your opinion, created more homelessness?
Definitely.
I did not like it. I feed off of people. I feed off of people.
She feeds off of people.
Okay, so
And like, there's no more human connections.
I think there's so many things that could be said about how lockdowns affected society. I think it was really a very isolating time. And I think in isolating times, people find themselves drawn to coping mechanisms, that maybe aren't the best or aren't the healthiest. And I don't know, I think it was just a really, really hard, upsetting time for a lot of people. I support them still, I think they're necessary. But you know, people are social. People need connection, and I think it can be a really tough thing to find a balance for.
I feel like there was a lot of like breaking crap around the city. That wasn't good. But the lockdowns, it was okay. I mean, I think schools really should have opened up a lot sooner. Like I think like grades dropped like citywide, well worldwide I think, but I don't know. Yeah, it was a big hit on schools I think.
It's pretty strange. It just felt very much surreal, especially at the beginning. And then I just sort of, well, it's interesting. I feel like I was affected the least because of what I do. I like skateboard, and a lot of my activities are either outdoor or completely like alone. So I didn't, besides having to wear a mask to go outside, not that much of my life changed. Yeah, in fact, I probably made more friends at these tennis courts over here during the first 2 months of the pandemic than I had the first 2 years of living here. So,
personally, I thought it was a personal thief of our rights, to be honest, and I thought that there was something going on that we weren't really being told, and I think it created bigger issues beyond just economy. I think it created a lot of eternal emotional issues within people. Creating a lot of seasonal depressions, or like the spike in relationship losses, or I think more so a lot of emotional challenges were brought into this world.
Well, the pandemic affected certainly our whole community, and the police bureau was certainly part of that. You know, in our cases, you know, we don't have a job for the most part where we can work remote. A lot of us that work here have to come in to work to do our job, especially when you're talking about patrol officers. Detectives, for the most part, have to actually be on site, and of course we have a lot of support staff as well. But you know, it's not lost on me that, you know, we have faced a lot of the same challenges that many other folks have faced, whether you work in healthcare or whether you work for transit agencies, for example. I mean, you have to be there, right? You have to go into work, and you know, having to you know, a lot. Oh, and the other thing is, a lot of us are parents, right? And so our kids, we're trying to do this school from home thing, so we're navigating all the stresses from home as well. You know, all of that affects us as human beings as well.
So I would say that the first thing, and I think this is, you know, jumps out to people as the most obvious, you know, negative impact, is psychological. I know, you know, many young people around my age, or maybe even younger, who sort of you know, developed like a sense of social anxiety, you know, as a result from you know, being isolated during lockdowns. You know, social isolation has an incredibly deleterious effect on the human mind, because it's that social interaction that really gives us kind of meaning and purpose in life. And so if we don't have that, you know, we're going to suffer. So yeah, I think the social isolation, you know, caused you know, so many sort of latent pathologies in people to really come out. And you know, beyond that, I do fear for the sort of sociological development of young children, you know, who are maybe toddlers during the time of the lockdown. I think we're going to see a lot of deleterious effects, you know, as they continue to grow up and develop.
I myself, I feel like, I know I watched a couple TikToks about it, but eating disorders, depression, tons. It was just it skyrocketed during the epidemic. Like, I know I myself, again, also struggled with an eating disorder. I mean, I was homeless during the epidemic, so I had an eating disorder. I was going through tons of stuff psychologically as well. So personally, I mean, I'm also trying to like speak for other people too, just because I know I'm not the only one that had to deal with that. But yeah, it was crazy. I feel like I literally just saw a statistic about how eating disorders in general just like skyrocketed during the start of the pandemic to like now. And it's just like, wow. Especially in like our youth too, because I feel like other apps too, like during the time that we did have the lockdown, I feel like TikTok blew up, like, and I feel like that whole thing definitely also changed. It changed so much, the whole lockdown, like totally 100%. I don't know.
I think the negative part of it is still present. There's still people suffering from it. A lot of people have not recovered from the lockdown. They're still trying to get on their feet to survive. The rent was crazy here as it is, and people still can't pay their rent just to have a place to stay. And I think during the lockdown, more people became homeless because of it.
There's, I know there's like speech pathologists who are seeing like skyrocketing cases of young kids who actually haven't learned how to communicate or speak properly, or recognize facial expressions properly, because of like everyone around them was wearing masks at a really crucial formative age. I think it is gonna, psychologically, there's gonna be very long effects of this. And also just, it put people's lives on hold for, in a very rude way, for a large stretch of time. People had to like cancel relationships that were forming. People had to, their jobs and careers were disrupted. And all that has consequences. And even though we're kind of past lockdowns now, we're not really past the lockdowns.
Yeah, I couldn't have any play dates, or like, I didn't, well, I was stuck inside usually for a year. Like, I didn't get to like go outside because we lived in a building.
You did. Do you remember why that was?
Because of the virus.
Because the virus, yeah, it was.
I couldn't even go to see a therapist.
Yeah, she couldn't even go see a therapist.
No.
We were just out here trying to weigh it out.
Yeah.
Was it worth it? Would you support another lockdown based on something as serious as the flu or COVID itself?
Yeah. I think I would, yeah. Because obviously, I think I agree with you, the levels of depression did rise. But you have to take into consideration the levels of depression versus the levels of people dying, right? And obviously, it would be better to not have to weigh both of those options. They're not good options. But when the other option is people dying in mass, what are you going to do? And I think instead of focusing on the lockdowns as the cause of depression, there are so many other things that you can point to that exacerbate the levels of depression, and there are so many other ways that we can offer support to people while simultaneously, keeping people safe through lockdowns.
There was an interesting article I read either from the Wall Street Journal or New York Times, where it said that the states that had lockdowns compared to the states that didn't have lockdowns showed relatively no difference in deaths.
Interesting.
So it showed that the lockdowns weren't really preventing the spread of the virus because people naturally need to go outside to live their lives.
Yeah, no, it's funny you say that. When the mask mandate was first lifted here, and I'm going to the grocery store with my mask, going to parties and whatnot, I got sick multiple times just with random little things that I had not been exposed to for 2 years. It was not COVID, but I was just getting crappy little illnesses here and there that I'm sure if I had not been wearing my mask, would not have got. Not to say that I wish I wasn't wearing my mask the whole time, but that is just a reality of the situation.
From where I'm from, at least, it's a super, super small town. Everybody knows each other, everybody talks, everybody is at the function, everybody's at the store, somebody, and I think a huge thing is not being able to see somebody's face, and you can't see the emotion within somebody's action of speaking. And so, more so, I think, yes, it created a huge barrier between communicating with other people. Like, I remember just when I was a kid walking down the streets, just being able to say hey to somebody, and it was so cool and so okay. Now it's more like, I internally have the insecurity of like, oh, well, is he like in fear of a pandemic, or is he in fear of a social distancing of 6 feet or 3 feet, or, you just can't have the voice for other people because there's been laws that were in place that kind of stuck with us.
My general experience is, it has increased the difficulty in connecting with our community. I think one of the best things that we do at the Portland Police Bureau is the ability to connect with folks. You know, most of the time when people actually talk face to face with a police officer, they come away with a better view of the police bureau and the people that work for us. You know, there are times where, you know, I have been personally talking to somebody that really felt like the police bureau did not care about what was happening to them. And I was able to have a conversation, let the person know that I did care, and that I am a human being, and that I am affected by what I see every day. You know, that makes a big difference in people's lives. And so when your face is covered, it's really hard to make those connections, right? You know, it's really hard. It's hard enough to get past this uniform and all this equipment. If your face is covered as well and you can't see someone's expression, boy, that really makes it tougher. You know, officers have found ways to kind of get around that and really express themselves verbally and to use their eyes to help connect with folks. But there's no doubt about it. You know, when your face is covered and you can't see someone's smile or, you know, their facial expression, it really makes it much more difficult.
This is something I really hate to say it, but I am incredibly cynical about. I saw COVID as almost the imposition of like a sort of business apartheid. Whereas, you know, small businesses like a lot of the, you know, food carts and a lot of mom and pop shops were forced to, you know, completely shutter during the pandemic. Well, you know, the giants, you know, because of their political power, were basically given, you know, free reign to grow and expand their businesses. And you see this, I think, this is very emblematic of Hollywood in California. They had connections with Governor Gavin Newsom there that basically allowed them to ignore, you know, these social distancing and, you know, masking, you know, practices on their sets. So they were still filming, they were still producing their, you know, films and TV shows, you know, while all the little mom and pop restaurants, you know, in the Los Angeles area were forced to close, and those people had no income. So, you know, at this point, I think the damage to a certain extent has been done. You know, I think there are going to be opportunities going forward for small businesses to establish themselves, you know, more after the lockdown. But it did do a hefty amount of damage to the smaller side of, you know, American business.
Not only small business. I used to work for Boeing in a company which was contractor for Boeing 787 Dreamliner, and it was dramatic for us because we were selling approximately 14 chipsets per month. And it went down to 3 or 4, and it affected our salaries, everything, working hours, and even we couldn't work overtime and some stuff. We had, we were forced to take vacations, and it was pretty hard time that year, 2020 and 2021.
Yeah, so yeah, a lot of businesses actually.
Yeah, sure. Not only small, but the big businesses.
And then the psychological aspects to it tend to cause a lot of depression.
Yep. So I was depressed, yeah.
You were depressed, yeah.
Lack of socialization to people, to friends, and work, and no work and all no play and all work.
Yeah.
Made me mad, really, and depressed. So.
Of course, like, people's livelihoods are definitely, like, important, but I feel like if we did our best to take, like, precautions, like wearing the masks like we had to, I feel like there was ways. I mean, like, I went the entire pandemic without getting COVID, and I was even in college, where I feel like a lot of, honestly, it was spreading a lot where I was going. So I feel like it wasn't, if you take the precautions to stay safe, I feel like it's kind of like doable, to be honest. I mean, yeah, those lockdowns, for me, I know they caused crisis a little bit in my life. So, like, yeah, I mean, I don't think it was very good for our economy. I wouldn't say, it's hard to, like, compare the two, honestly, just because, yeah, like, people's livelihoods and, like, their lives in general, keeping people safe and healthy is super, super, super important. Which, again, is, like, we have to do the most of what we can to take those precautions to make it safer for other people, because other people can. COVID is a real thing, you know, people did die. I feel like it was just a crazy epidemic. And that's not to take away, like, I don't know, it's hard to compare the two because both of them are so, I mean, you're talking about, like, people's literal, like, livelihoods and then people's, like, actual life, you know, the breathing and, like, whatnot, which is equally important, I feel like. I feel like struggling and being homeless is not anywhere where I would want someone to be, especially if like we had another lockdown, which it did cause a lot of that.
I'm a little more optimistic. I think being here in Portland since, looking from like 2020, 2021 now, it has gotten a little bit better from, I think, like the worst of it in like 2021. Just anecdotally, my own observations. And I was pleased to see some small businesses survived pretty well, rebounded. I was happy Powell's book survived. And I think there's definitely was a serious blow. I don't necessarily know about it being irreversible. I know a lot of people are just getting fed up with, Amazon and such and trying to buy their products elsewhere. So I wouldn't say the situation's hopeless regard to small businesses, but it definitely was a very good thing for Amazon, a bad thing for all the mom and pop shops and local restaurants and such.
Well, just different businesses that I would frequent I couldn't go to because they weren't open. And then too, a lot of them shut down completely because they couldn't survive.
Every store got shut down.
Bad. Every store got shut down.
Yeah.
Restaurants, everything.
Yeah.
That's why the homeless population is increased, because there's no money.
Yeah.
I don't think downtown Portland is like what people make it out to be, frankly. But it is, like, look around, there's so many people walking about, there's so many open businesses around here, but it definitely isn't what it used to be. And it is, upsetting to see so many businesses that I really enjoyed and really loved closed down.
It's more like they needed to have better systems in place. Like, I know back in Hawaii, the economy there isn't great, and like they relied too much on tourism, so the businesses were going to fail if they didn't have tourists. If they had a better system set up for the economy, they might have done better, and the lockdown wouldn't have hurt as much.
Yeah, it makes me really sad because I love my city. I remember going downtown as a kid and everything would be open, be bright, like going to the Pearl, stuff like that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's beautiful now, but I see a lot of places closed that way.
One of the things I think could have been done better is just, they say that they had to shut down a lot of the businesses around the city. And I just felt that, it's kind of hypocritical to say, we have to shut down businesses to keep people safe, yet you're also destroying the very livelihoods that people need to keep themselves afloat.
That's very true.
You know what I mean?
Right, and I can attest personally to that. My mother owns a small business locally within the town we grew up in, and totally crushed it. Like, the whole pandemic crushed her dream, crushed everything she had hoped and wanted to bring into this world, and swiped it right from her. And it was just super sad to see. My mom had this huge passion to help the planet. Her dream is to open a eco-friendly organic market, which she had to wait a year or two to eventually start it, which is now here. But if you think about it, she purchased the space, and 2 years passes, she couldn't have it open until then. And it just kind of personally affected our family of like, wow, my mom has these dreams and aspirations, but the government doesn't really give a fuck about that. They just want to think like, oh, well, okay. I guess more so there was no emotions put into action of the jurisdiction being held.
I think it is hard to say what all contributed to it. I think the pandemic certainly affected us all in many ways, and it affected us in ways that caused a lot of stress for almost everybody in the community. Stress and anxiety do play a role in how people behave and how they act. So do I believe that it impacted how people acted? Yes. And does that mean that some people may have involved themselves in crime? I'm not sure I'm quite willing to go that far, but we certainly saw a lot of calls for service that may or may not really be necessarily related to crime that I do believe were connected to it. And those are the mental health crisis calls that we go to. those are the drug overdose. I think there has been an increased use of drugs and alcohol in our community as a coping mechanism. Again, that's my personal opinion. I don't have data to back that up, but that's what I'm seeing out there, and that's what I'm hearing from other officers on the street.
Well, I have one other question. How do you guys align politically? Do you consider yourselves liberal, moderate? Does that have an effect on do you think that matters on your opinion?
I'll start with this one out. At this point, the labels in every direction for, people's like individual politics are just so shot that they almost don't mean anything anymore. Broadly, I would say that I come out of the progressive left-wing tradition. That being said, I have a lot of contentions with sort of like the, sort of like a lot of the kind of elite, sort of liberal pieties that are oftentimes imposed on people. And, that's a large part of our personal, conversation about those topics. Nick, do you want to give a little window into your political?
I'd say I'm like a moderate at this point. I'm registered independent and just kind of disaffected, to be honest.
Yeah, I feel politically homeless. Nick, I think to a certain extent, is in the same boat. So it's tough. And like I said, the labels are shot. So, I mean, what even are you? It's hard to throw that out there.
Okay, so did you feel like the lockdowns were necessary or not necessary?
I mean, with the current status of where we are, I mean, maybe like with the vaccines, I feel like it was potentially necessary. I feel like that's such a like controversial question, to be honest. And
Sure.
if I'm gonna be completely transparent, no, I don't think that it was like super necessary.
The first time when the COVID occurred, it was chaos, and this lockdown was pretty necessary. But after that, I think that we were depressed and we had lack of socialization. But there was a time that more lockdown, more restrictions were needed. But in my country, there was less lockdown restrictions.
Mm-hmm.
They thought that it was not as bad as it was, the COVID, and we had just storms of COVID in my country for
Right.
that. So I think I'm not an expert, but with my experience and what I've been looking at in my country, more restrictions would be better for some specific times, because in summer you couldn't hold people in their houses and in the beach places when they went on vacation, and when they came back to capital city of Georgia, it was so dramatic situation in my city. So
Okay, and if we were to have another lockdown, would you be for it or against it?
I'd be against it. If we can come up with some precautionary ways of people surviving through it, that might help. But to just shut everything down completely is just devastating for Portland in general.
Did you see any positives at all from the lockdown?
I have to think real hard to find
Yeah.
one. Because like other issues.
Probably like be more patient.
Being more patient helps you gain patience.
Yeah.
Do you feel like any shape or form they treated adults like myself, like you, kind of like children, making decisions for them, and they not just lockdowns alone, but
Yeah.
as a whole,
Uh-huh.
taking away decisions from adults. Adults have the right to make themselves.
Yeah, I think that is a complicated question. But I think sometimes it's important for a community and a society to be able to collectively make decisions together, and I think it would be preferred if people were. I don't think it's necessarily helpful to point it to individual decisions, and I think it's better to think of it more as we as individuals are who come together to make a community, and we can be individuals and still make those communal decisions together to help out the most vulnerable of our society. I don't agree with a lot of the decisions that politicians make, most of them. But I don't know. Sometimes I guess it's necessary. I don't know. It's a tough question.
I don't know. I think now that we've kind of come out of lockdown and seen like what it has done, it's a hard decision to make and like a hard thing to talk about. But like, what would the point of lockdown be now? If we're like all vaccinated and we have more research done about COVID and we know kind of how to prevent it.
Okay, so you're not pro lockdown at this point. You would say no.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. And if the government should decide to do another lockdown, what would you advocate?
No thanks, government.
What would you feel if they said we needed to do another lockdown?
Man, you'd have to have a really good justification for that. I mean, and justification or not, I'd be pretty unhappy. Yeah.
And did it affect any other family members?
Oh, sure. Yeah, of course. I've got some people in my family that are just living in kind of like abject terror day to day still about the virus. So, and then I've got, another half of my family who's kind of in the same mindset I am, where it's like, got vaccinated, wore my mask when they told me I had to, and now that, those mandates have been sort of lifted and things have kind of settled down, I feel very much comfortable just being out in the world. So,
what would you say if they were going to do another lockdown? What would your reaction be?
My reaction would not be okay. I think the people as a whole, to speak on behalf of the earth, I know I don't have a voice that big, but I think everybody would be frustrated, and I think people would revolt against that, and they would be like, no, I'm not doing that again. I can't go there again. I can't. Because that was personally a trauma for me, my family, my relationships, and I think it's just something that most people can't go through again. Most of my family and friends are still recovering from all of the lockdowns and everything in place. So I think the people as a whole need to come together and decide, hey, we're humans and we can adapt to ourselves and not some higher government over us,
Well, I mean, I think that those of us that have lived through COVID-19 will never forget it. I think this is one of those historic events that has affected the world, really, and all of us in a profound way, and it's changed how we do things and how we view the world, and I think Portland is certainly no exception. I've noticed that how people utilize their city, where they work has changed. Businesses that used to be very busy suddenly saw their customers disappear, like restaurants and things like that. So that affected them. A lot of businesses went out of business. We've seen that. Vacancy rates, especially when we were in the thick of the pandemic. Just the events that happened, like the concerts, and the dances and the other events where we'd normally come together as a community, they weren't happening, right? And I think it has definitely affected Portland. Portland is a different city. I've grown up here. This is my hometown, and it is different now than I can never remember it being. I do feel like Portland has shown its resilience, and we have a lot of problems, but I think we're going to come back to something that is beautiful and something that is admirable and something that we can be proud of. I think we've come a long way since the lockdowns have been lifted, frankly, and I look forward to seeing more improvements as we move forward as a community. I lost my train of thought there. I look forward to seeing what Portland's going to look like in the next 2 years as we address some of these vexing problems that we're facing, and I'd love to see us come together more to address those problems and